One. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. So it's our weekly podcast, video cast. I don't know what we call it, but we were a little bit late this week because we had some construction issues that created some internet problems for me. So this is the weTHINK weekly video update and interview with our working group participants and with researchers, practitioners, and all other specialists and experts in the field of UAV, UGV, and uninhabited emerging threats. And today we have Sean, who's also working on the project. And our guest today is Tom Kane. And if you just want to give an introduction to everybody who is following our little dedicated crowd, I would appreciate it.
Okay, sure. So my name's Tom Kane. I currently work for a company called Blue Lights Digital. I've been doing that since the early part of this year. We're a company that specialises in training, investigations, software, hardware support for majority of the time law enforcement agencies in the UK, but also one or two other places around the globe. And before moving to Blue Lights Digital, I was a police officer for 14 years. During my time there, I was a dedicated digital media investigator, so advising on all sorts of investigations, advising the digital aspect of those investigations, so how to maximize opportunities from any sort of digital side that might be involved. And I also spent 3.5 years as a detective in a paedophile online investigation team. So in that time, I did lots of computer forensics, mobile phone forensics, did stuff with Wi-Fi, computer networks, all sorts of bits and bobs like that. And then touched one or two, those investigations touched on the use of UAVs. We saw one or two people in the UK using drones to drop packages into prisons, things like that. And then since moving over to Blue Lights Digital, I've kind of taken the role as lead investigator on drone investigations, UAVs, counter UAV, and that side of things. And hence how I've got involved with you guys.
Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for taking the time to join us. And it's actually really impressive. I didn't know all the history. I knew a bit of the history, but it's a very impressive history. And I think it's going to be interesting to just discuss with you, given, you know, kind of what we had been mentioning before we started recording, which is the context of Ukraine and how in Ukraine we're seeing the commercial off-the-shelf drones basically experiencing an exponential growth in innovation or evolution, and how through this kind of connectivity of social media, how everything was shared on by TikTok or Twitter, that a lot of these ideas or new drones might be passed on to inspire maybe criminal organizations or other non-state actors or criminal elements, violent non-state actors, that kind of thing. And it would be interesting, I imagine, with your experience, if we were to think about the emerging threat aspect, that whether it's the number of right-wing extremists or other extremists that went into this conflict that maybe learned how to modify and operate commercial off-the-shelf UAVs or COTS UAVs, so we can say it a little bit shorter, and transmit that knowledge back. Like we saw this case in 2018 in Germany with the KSK, the Special Forces Unit in the German military, I believe, being exposed for effectively what was a far-right plan for a coup d'etat, and they had, you know, cached all these weapons. So I think, you know, they're using forensics to trace each of those bullets that they would find in the cache, and I think the case is still developing new stories through forensics, they're tracing where everything was coming back, how they're getting access to it, how they're actually stealing it and putting in caches. And so I imagine that's another element of the counterterror, that we would be concerned about how these ideas are being imported back. Are these foreign fighters that have gone into Ukraine? Are they going to bring these ideas back to groups or cells? At a possibility? And again, I think if there were some kind of nefarious use of drones and that drone were to be captured or taken down, then what would the role of forensics be? I mean, I imagine you would be able to look at who supplied them, these kinds of things. Would you be able to kind of, it's a broad question,
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit?
Okay. Yeah. So the majority of the time when it comes to the digital forensic side of UAVs, it's kind of examining the downed drone. So recovering it, so how to safely deal with the UAV once you've got it secured. But then it's really trying to figure out where it came from, who was in control of it when it was in flight. So, we've got methods of hooking up to the UAV, not only downloading any sort of video or stills that might have been captured by the device, if it's got onboard camera, but also examining the onboard telematics from the device. So we can download a whole track log of where it's been, when it's been flown, not only getting sort of GPS coordinates for everywhere it's been, but also you can get details of even what each individual motor is doing on the device, its pitch and its yaw, so how it's being controlled, to try and get a picture of perhaps you've not been able to secure the actual pilot of the device. So, reading all that information, you should be able to figure out its flight path, so track back to where it came from. And then from there, perhaps, there's other inquiries you can then do to try and figure out where the person came from. Other options are if you manage to secure the actual control unit. So, a lot of these off-the-shelf drones, they're flown in combination with a mobile phone or tablet device. So if you can obtain the phone or the tablet, then we can also do examinations of those devices and extract the companion app for the UAV. So a lot of these, people are using the DJI drones, so they'll have a DJI app on their mobile phone. So again, we can get a lot of information that the app has stored. So historic flights. So perhaps if they've been doing some reconnaissance, we might be able to see other flights they've been doing in order to, sort of pre-plan for their attacks. Perhaps other locations they've flown the device. So, if they've been practicing flying it in their back garden or wherever, then that's going to help us figure out other locations that the group have been to. If they've been, scoping out other locations, other potential targets, we can obtain information about that from previous flights. And then, of course, if you're examining their mobile phone and tablet, then there's all sorts of other information that might store about, have they been researching online other things? Have they been watching YouTube videos, or maybe figuring out how to, not only pilot the device, but maybe how to adapt it, make modifications to it. Have they been researching other things that they might want to attach to it, so explosives or devices that can release a vapor, all sorts of things like that. And then there's other things we can grab from the mobile phone, so sort of networks they've been connecting to. So have they been connecting to Wi-Fi networks at home, or have they been visiting public locations and connecting to Wi-Fi networks? Are there emails on their phone, looking at their contacts list, who are they speaking to? All sorts of other bits of information like that. And then also, so we've looked at the UAV itself, the control unit, but then also there could be other devices that are sort of linked to the device. So you know, a lot of the time we think about people using these devices with explosives or hazardous substances, but also they can be used for other purposes. So, you know, Wi-Fi hacking. So you could attach a Wi-Fi hacking device to the drone, a bit like people might have heard a thing called a Wi-Fi pineapple device. So attaching things like that to a drone so that they can then go and you know, carry out attacks on Wi-Fi networks and things like that. So if devices like that are also seized, then we can look at examining those to see what else they might have been doing. GPS jammers, all sorts of things like that that they may be trying to attach to these things that we might be able to examine and get information from as well.
Well, I guess like one of your other areas of expertise, I think, is specialization is OSINT. It's kind of like with the amount of variables that you have, each one opens up another layer of variables to look into, at least you to another area of factors. And it just kind of one question, it brought to mind, I saw some article a few months ago that came up, or as a research paper, about how digital forensics, they were able to track the ISIS logistics route of their commercial off-the-shelf drones. And basically, it was very complicated, but I think it came somehow out of Thailand or something like that. That's where it was the main hub, and then it would make its way through other states, eventually into the hands of ISIS. But I imagine that would be an aspect as well. You can, each part you can basically trace, could you trace it to its producer, right?
Potentially, yeah. So obviously examining the device on their mobile phones, things like that, can give us lots of information about where they've been and what they've been doing. But the mobile phone is often attached to the, you know, potentially the last user of the device. But whereas if the UAV has been handed from one person to another, maybe sent over, you know, sent through postage, things like that, then yeah, trying to figure out where it came from originally. So yeah, there can be some open source investigations that you could carry out. A lot of that might be sort of trying to look at, so one of the things we can do is look at the images that you've captured from the drone. So obviously sometimes there might be GPS metadata attached to the actual images themselves, but if you don't have that, then it's using the actual what has been captured in the image to try and figure out where that came from. And it's quite an art in that itself. So studying the terrain that's in the photograph, looking at sort of vehicles and buildings within the photograph to try and figure out the region of the planet they may come from, where they come, because, you know, each different country and region has different looking buildings. Using shadows as well to try and figure out time of day and potentially even which parts of the hemisphere that they're actually positioned from the shadows. Cloud formations, you can even use cloud formations to try and figure out from Met Office records as to where that photograph may have been taken on a specific day. All sorts of information like that to try and figure out potentially where these other images have come from. And then if there's photographs of road networks, vehicles, that helps you try and figure out not only a location, but also maybe a route that people have taken to move things. All sorts of stuff like that, yeah.
I guess, so I imagine the sheer amount of data that you're dealing with must be massive, between what you're recovering from the downed drone itself, to the devices, to the individual parts that make up each of the devices, and then what you uncover from each of those. It seems like an onion. It's a kind of endless
Absolutely.
cycle. How is it that, I guess I have two questions. First would be, how is it that that you can effectively manage so much data? And the second point is, have you seen any trends occurring? I would be curious to see if any of these cartels or non-state actors or violent non-state actors or terror cells or whatever have become aware of this aspect of an investigation and that have taken measures to try to deceive or misdirect or, obscure the details if you were to do a digital forensics investigation on the device.
Yeah, so the amount of device we have to deal with in a sort of digital investigation is enormous sometimes, and it can be a real headache to try and handle it and deal with it. So we use techniques to try and use some of the software that we use. We use some techniques to try and drill down and locate what is most likely to be of relevance to us. So we use sort of keyword lists. So these can be sort of names of people involved, dates of births, email addresses, telephone numbers, specific locations, so towns and cities, roads, names of buildings. And we also try and narrow down into specific dates. So all the data will have a timestamp attached to it. So we can then use a date and time to try and narrow down the actual just specific events that might be of interest to us. So using those in combination, keywords along with timeframes, allows us to narrow down the amount of data that we have to look at as well. Some of the software we use also incorporates AI algorithms, so it can try and automatically categorize images for you. So it automatically identifies if there's weapons or vehicles, people within images. So again, it sort of narrows down the amount of media that we have to look through. And then when it comes to people sort of becoming aware of this type of work, then yeah, it's very well known now. There's many court cases that have been passed now where digital forensics has been strong bit of evidence used. So they're all well aware that it gets used. So we do see people increasingly using encryption, password protecting files, turning to the dark web for their sort of internet browsing, so that they're hiding their history more and more, using cloud storage so that they're not actually retaining data themselves, storing it on cloud. So it's hiding it from us. Using all sorts of sort of kill switches on computers as well. So if somebody comes into a location, they can just hit a button and it starts erasing data straight away. So bits and bobs like that. Using computers that don't store any, don't have any history or actually retain data, so that as soon as you power it off, any history or images, anything they might have been looking at is lost straight away. It doesn't actually save its status at any point. So yeah, number of things people are using to try and make our digital forensics life a little bit harder.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. What you're saying is really interesting, Tom, and it's really making me think that, when we're talking about counter UAV threat or countering threats for this project, that maybe the concept goes well beyond just the kind of hardware and equipment, but the countering of the actor, of their cells, of their networks and stuff like that. There's two questions that I was holding or have, and the first one might be kind of an easy question or maybe not, but is, from a forensics and investigative point of view, is it better to have, if you had to have one or the other, so perhaps maybe a drone itself has a malfunction, gets left behind, any of those things, and then you have the actual device itself, or would it be better, like what is better? Is it better to have the drone itself, or if you had just the controller? What's going to provide you with the more in-depth information that you need to kind of understand the device and who's using it?
If I had the choice, I would have the mobile phone that was used as the controller, because everything that the drone does is fed back to the device. So the device is going to have all the logs of all of its flights on it, but it's also going to have all that other information that goes along with a person's mobile phone. So, you know, everybody now has a smartphone, and a lot of the time, well, it could be that if the actor is sort of careful about this, they'll buy a dedicated mobile phone just as the controller for the device. So, you know, it's not going to have so much of their personal data on it. However, you know, if somebody's been a little bit lazy, then they may use their own device, or, you know, maybe this is the sort of build up to, you know, a main attack. It may be we've managed to catch them during one of their reconnaissance flights, so they have just used their own personal device whilst they're sort of practicing their flights. So yeah, we'd get all that other information about their personal life on that device as well, so all their contacts and history, all their personal photographs and stuff, so we can figure out, you know, get more of a background to who they are as well. So yeah, that would be my preference.
Right. And yeah, and just kind of keeping with the theme of maybe the actor and what they're doing to disguise themselves. You know, the drone technology has really taken off. We're talking about changes in tactics, and the technology itself is moving extremely quickly. I see this kind of corresponding with the rise of 3D printing, the availability of 3D printing, and you know, Raspberry Pi and like your own programming and stuff like that. How do you think that these two things come together, and like how like these things kind of coming you know, to fruition, or to into focus at the same time? How does that kind of make it more difficult, or what types of you know,
Yeah,
what does that do for you as the investigator? And also, you know, what are the emerging trends from that? Are we seeing anything in that?
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
obviously there's been quite a few cases of people using 3D printers to manufacture attachments for UAVs. So mechanisms for dropping devices, and then sort of attachments for whatever it is they're dropping. So there's been cases of people manufacturing sort of flights for grenades so that they fly straighter. So one of, you know, our main objective when we're doing digital forensics is to provide evidence that's going to get us a conviction at court. So at the end of the day, we're looking for evidence to prove that the person has carried out these modifications. So we'd be looking to try and trace back all their steps that they've taken from, you know, preparation through to manufacture to the actual flight. So if we'd recovered a drone with 3D printed parts on it, or things that had been dropped that have got 3D printed parts, then we'd be looking to trace that back. So again, it's looking at computers or devices that they might have designed the 3D printed parts on, and then the files that would have been transferred to the 3D printer in order to print those out. So it's hunting out and looking for those files and those, you know, the sort of blueprints for these parts that they're manufacturing, then looking for the actual printer and examining the printer. Has the printer kept any history of the items that it's printed out? You could then also look for other parts around the printer, so actual spools of the 3D filament as well. And then there's sort of more traditional forensics you can do with the filament to match that up, so that the plastic and the filament is the same as what was on the actual drone. So we're looking for memory cards as well that might go with the 3D printer. Often you swapping and changing memory cards with all these files that are on them. And I guess we'd also be looking for, again, internet browsing history. So have they been going on some of the websites where you can share 3D printed plans? So we're looking for that whole sort of chain of custody of the digital evidence. Where did they originally get it from, or did they design it themselves? And then where was it stored on the computer? And then how did it get to the 3D printer? And then how did it get to the 3D printer to the drone? So it's trying to get all the stages of the preparation through to when the actual sort of offense or attack took place.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds extremely holistic. It's not just limited to the drone itself or the person or the group itself, but there's an entire world in which you have to kind of explore to understand how these things are making it into the action space or the space.
Yeah.
I guess it's coming to about that time. I don't want to keep you too late, but I guess we have a million questions. But I would hope that for the video, we can post our video and start a discussion about this, because it's a really interesting subject, and I think it's safe to say that the digital forensics, it's the future of counter drone investigation, or counter unmanned or uninhabited systems investigations, because it sounds to be solid evidence. I mean, you can't argue that this was constructed, or the data says that it was in this place, at least yet. I mean, maybe someone can spoof, or I don't know, in the future there will be some developments, but on that note, I want to say thank you so much for your time, and 2 times, the second time we got it, and I appreciate you making the time again today to come in and speak with us. So that's
and I'll be looking out on the Discord group. So if anybody's got any questions or anything, then I'll try and answer them.
all right. I hope so, because I certainly have a million in my head. So again, thanks for anybody and everybody that's watching, and thanks again to Tom Kane from Blue Light Digital.
Yep.
Correct. I want to make sure I get it right. And this is the WeThink weekly UAV, UGV, unmanned, uninhabited. Eventually, we're going to have everything. So I'll just say uninhabited systems, emerging threats, podcast, video cast, whatever you want to call it. So we'll see you next week, or this week probably. And thanks again for everybody for joining and watching. All right, so I'm going to try and hit stop recording and not embarrass myself. Take care, everyone.